We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but before we begin this presentation about English in the US workplace, we want to learn a little bit more about our audience today. So we know we have people joining from all over the world, and well, we'll tell you all of our background. It's always helpful to hear where people are calling in from and what part of the United States they might want to do their internship, what field they're interested in. So while you type in your response, I will get started with the introductions. My name is Tammin Nicholson. I'm the program manager for the Career Training USA program, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Abigail Grazel. Abby is the Participant Services Coordinator. Actually, I'll just let you introduce yourself, Abby.
Oh, yep. I'm the Participant Services Coordinator here in the Career Training USA department, and I am actually joining from Maine.
Excellent. And we have a few responses that have already been submitted to us about where people are coming. Minji is in Korea. It's going to be very late right now in Korea. She's planning on doing an internship in Los Angeles. And then Andrea from Mexico wants to do a culinary internship in San Francisco. I think culinary has been a really popular field of late. Olga from Russia plans to do her internship in business in Colorado. So a bit of three different responses, 3 different continents, a bit of nice diversity on this audience. So we're really excited to continue this webinar series. This is our 9th webinar in a series of 10 that we have conducted this fall, and the webinars have covered everything from searching for internships in the United States to preparing and carrying out interviews for internships. And now as we move into some of the later sessions, we want to talk more about what it'll be like once you actually come to the United States and begin your internship. So today's session is going to focus on English in the US workplace. For those of you who are familiar with Career Training USA or InterExchange, we are a nonprofit organization based in New York City, and our mission is to promote cross-cultural exchange between students and young professionals in the United States and students and young professionals from overseas countries to come to the United States and pursue internships or trainee programs. And obviously with the pandemic, there's been much less opportunity for people to come and train face-to-face, and we see that's slowly changing and more opportunities are arising. But we know that a lot of people are using this time to make preparations for summer of 2022 or maybe even spring of 2022 and begin their internship programs in the United States. So we want to make sure we can help you during this time and provide the resources that you might need to find an internship, to get ready to come to the United States, and then thrive in that internship once you actually do get here. A bit of housekeeping before we begin. Everyone is muted, so if you do have any questions, please just type them into the chat box the way you did when you were telling us where you are from in the world. We'll also stop a few places in the presentation just to go through any questions that have come in, and then we'll do a longer Q&A at the end of the presentation just to cover all of the miscellaneous questions that you might have about this topic. If you have to leave early or if your internet cuts out, everyone who registered for the session is going to get a recording. So don't worry, we'll send you in the next day or so a recording of this full session. If you have any friends who meant to sign up and got confused with the daylight savings time zone or whatever, they'll also get a recording of this session as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby and let her begin this presentation and start telling us about English in the US workplace.
Great, thanks so much, Tammin. So yeah, as Tammin said, this presentation is about English in the US workplace. I do want to give you an outline of today's session just so you kind of know what we're going to talk about. It is a very broad topic, so there were a lot of different things that we could talk about, and you might have very specific questions, but we did want to kind of just give you an overview of some of the basic terms and some of the cultural norms that you should be aware of when you're coming to the US to do an internship. So we're going to start today by giving you some terms and some information about speaking on the phone, about writing emails. So those are kind of the 2 main ways you'll probably communicate with on the job during your internship in the office. And then we'll move on to socializing with your coworkers, because that is an important part of your internship as well, and allowing you to get that full cultural exchange experience. And then we'll end today's session with talking about some professional idioms that you can maybe expect to hear while you're in the US during your program. All right, so let's get started. and we'll talk about, having phone conversations. So this is one of the ways you'll probably need to communicate in English while you're in the US. And it is, often kind of nerve-wracking, the idea of speaking on the phone. I know some English speakers who don't like talking on the phone at all, even in their own native language. So I'm sure it's even much more nerve-wracking to think of speaking on the phone in a language that's not your native language. So within the next 2 slides, we've listed out some common phrases that you can expect to use on the phone. I know that sometimes having a script or knowing what to say can certainly help with any nerves that you might have, when you answer that phone. So when you're answering the phone, these are a couple of phrases here we've listed on this slide. You can consider using one of these. The pretty generic basic one is, hi, this is Abby, so your name, and you just say, how can I help you? This is generally if you're answering the phone and speaking with a customer, for example. Sometimes you might want to state your company's name. So, thanks for calling InterExchange. This is Abby. So you obviously want to always tell them who they're speaking with. So starting with your name is a pretty basic way to get started. And then here are some common responses to phone questions. Maybe someone called and you can't understand them. You would say, I'm sorry, could you please repeat that? If you need to ask someone a question, you might, within your office, you might ask the person if you can put them on hold. So that way you can, kind of mute yourself and talk to your coworker to kind of get some more information. The main thing to remember about speaking on the phone is that it's important to be extra polite, since you can't read anyone else's body language and the people you're on the phone with can't read your body language. So this can sometimes lead to some miscommunications. So you want to be as clear and polite as possible, especially if you're speaking to customers. So for example, you might want to say something like, may I ask who's calling, rather than who are you? Who are you? That can maybe come across as rude. So you just want to ask them politely for their name so you can have more information about what they're calling about. Again, as I said earlier, maybe if you can't understand someone, you might want to politely ask them to repeat what they said. You don't want to, be really rude and be like, I don't understand you. What did you say? That would come across as even more rude on the phone. So you want to be as polite as possible and say, I'm really sorry. I didn't get everything you said. Could you please repeat yourself? So that's just one of the main points to remember when you're talking on the phone. Okay, and then if we move on to just give you some phone tips, some things you want to keep in mind when you're talking on the phone. As we said in the first slide, introduce yourself first. You want to make sure your greeting is short, but you want it to make sure that it tells the caller exactly who they're speaking to. So the first thing to do is introduce yourself and who you are. And then take notes while you're on the phone, when you first answer it. Trying to listen in English maybe is a bit overwhelming, but the nice thing about the phone is that the caller can't see you, so you can feel free to take notes as you're speaking with them. You can write down any important information like the caller's name, their phone number, and the reason they're calling. So that way, once you get off the phone, you have all of the information you need to maybe pass along a message or to call the person back if you were trying to figure out an answer for them. The third tip is to use the hold button. So if you do need to talk to one of your coworkers and you want to put the person on hold, make sure to click the actual hold button so that your conversation can't be heard in the background. Sometimes if you don't, you just push the phone aside, the person on the phone can still hear parts of your conversation, and that comes across as unprofessional. So your phone probably has a button that you can click to kind of mute all conversation that's not on the phone. And then the fourth tip is to speak clearly and calmly. Sometimes phone connections aren't great. Sometimes they're static or it's hard to hear someone. So it's important to remember to speak clearly and calmly so that your listener has an easier time understanding you. this way they also know that you're giving them your full attention. If you're speaking clearly and calmly, they know that you're listening to them. And then when you are speaking, try not to interrupt the other person. You want to make sure to listen to their whole story, even if you don't fully understand something. So that's why taking notes is important, because you can kind of take notes of any questions you have while they're speaking. And then once they're done, you can go back and address some of those questions that you've written down. So you don't want to interrupt them. You want them to feel like you're listening and they're being heard. And then, as I said before, a big tip is to be polite and use formal language. Remember, your body language isn't seen, so you want to be more formal on the phone than you would be in person. And then the last tip is to stay cheerful. So you want to stay as upbeat as possible while on the phone, because your tone will come through, and it will help you to sound more polite and professional if you sound more excited than maybe you feel while you're on the phone. A monotone voice can come across as more rude on the phone than perhaps it would in person. So just make sure to stay as upbeat and as you can, and maybe smile while you're on the phone. Even if they can't see you, they'll see that, they'll hear that in your voice. Great. All right, so now we can move on to email, which is another big portion of communication in the business world. It does have kind of its own culture since it is used so frequently. Some things to remember is, much like speaking on the phone, it's typically better to be polite and formal in your emails so that you avoid misinterpretation or misunderstanding. So we have highlighted some email terms here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are just some terms that you may encounter. CC is carbon copy, BCC is blind carbon copy. Maybe you'll hear reply or reply all. For all of those terms, the main thing to remember is to be careful how you use each of those email functions. So for example, you need to think about who you're writing your email to and who you're going to CC, so who you're going to copy into that email. So for example, if it's a coworker you're emailing and then you CC their manager, that could come across as rude or aggressive. So just make sure to think of all the implications, all of the possibilities of how your email could be understood depending on who you're replying all to, who you're CCing, that sort of thing. We do have some additional email terms listed here. These are some terms you might hear used around the office. So maybe someone will mention spam, or maybe they'll talk about a phishing email. It's important to become familiar with these terms so that you know what someone is referring to when you hear them. So for example, phishing is a bad thing. You don't want to get a phishing email. You don't want to be a victim of phishing. So it's important to understand that if an email attachment is a phishing attack, for example, that you understand that's bad, I shouldn't click on that attachment because someone's going to hack into our computer system. So those are always a good email terms to become familiar with. Let us know if you have any questions about these terms in the chat box, and we will try to answer some of those questions during our question break a little bit farther into the presentation. A lot of them are fairly straightforward, but I know that sometimes it can be confusing. So please let us know if you have any questions. So I do want to move on now to just email structure, so you kind of have an idea of how to structure an email when you're writing in the business world. So the formality of your email will depend on who you're emailing. So if we kind of look at these 4 options here, these are kind of the main structure of an email. So the first column, the first thing you would write obviously would be your greeting. So typically you do start an email with a greeting, and these ones kind of go in order from the most formal to the least formal. So Dear Dr. Miller is the most formal greeting that you would use in an email. So often you will use this with a customer, maybe someone you've never met before. You know, anytime you want to be the most formal possible, you would use dear, which is the most formal. And then doctor is this person's title. So if you use a title, that also is more formal, more professional and polite. Hello, Miss Gray. Again, you use their title, so you're still being professional, but maybe you've met this person before and you have a little bit more of a relationship. So you would say hello, which is a little bit more familiar, a little friendly, typically something, if you've met them before, you might use. Although that's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes in the US, since we kind of do have a little bit of a less formal culture, you might sometimes say hello, Miss Gray, to someone you haven't met before as well. It kind of depends on the culture of the host company you're working for and who you're communicating with. And then hi, Tom is the least formal email greeting. You might use this with a coworker in an email, for example, or you know, with someone that you're partners with that you've have a lot of communication with. It's more of a quick, you know, hello, familiar greeting. So after the greeting, you would move on to opening lines. So these are just a couple of examples of opening lines you might use. So you might talk about the reason why you're writing. You know, I'm writing with an update on our project. Sometimes you want to thank them for their last email. So you might say, thanks for getting back to me. You know, thanks for answering my question. And then the last one, I hope you're doing well. That's kind of more of a small talk greeting, just a way of being nice and asking how the person is doing. We'll talk about small talk in a little bit when we talk about socializing with coworkers, but that's kind of present in an email as well, and that's a way that you can do that. So after the opening lines, you would maybe move into the body of the email, which is kind of where you list out the reason why you're writing them. And then you might end with a closing line. So these are some examples of some closing lines you might use. I look forward to hearing from you. You know, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you might have. Those are both kind of typical closing ways that you would end an email. And then have a great weekend. That's also another kind of less formal way of doing a little bit of small talk at the end of your email. It's just kind of a nice way to say goodbye. And then the closing greeting, again, they go most formal to least formal. So sincerely, typically, if you said dear at the beginning, you would use sincerely at the end. Kind regards is a pretty common one that you will see in a lot of emails, or all the best, another closing. So after all of these closings, you would list your own name to sign off the email. And here's just a nice example of a typical email. We've kind of highlighted some of the parts of an email with the terms. So the subject is the one at the top, marketing project confirmed. You can see there's my name, Abigail, and then right underneath you can see who the email is being sent. So you can see who it's to and who is being CC'd, so who's copied in the email. And then you can see my greeting, hello Fatima, and then afterwards is, you know, it was nice meeting with you again yesterday. So that's a little bit of small talk. You know, I mentioned why I'm writing, and then at the end I say, you know, we look forward to working with you. So again, another nice way to end, another option to end an email. And then you can see my, I signed it as Abby, and then my email signature is underneath. So that's typically on every email, and it lists, you know, how I can be contacted and who I am. And this email also came with an attachment. So that's usually at the bottom, and it's typically a document, you know, that you've had to send to someone. So if we move on to some email tips, much like our phone tips, we've listed some things you should keep in mind when you're writing emails. So the first is that business writing is clear and concise. So you want to make sure to use simple language. So as we mentioned, a couple of slides ago, you want to judge your audience and kind of make your email more formal or less formal depending on who you're writing. So emails to coworkers can be more casual, quick, and conversational. An email to a client might be more formal. The next step is to sign your email with your preferred name. So as we saw in the last slide, I signed my name Abby, but underneath that in my email signature lists my name as Abigail. So if I sign Abby, I'm telling the person who writes me back that it's okay to call me Abby because that is a name that I go by. So we recommend that you sign with your preferred name. Your name and your email might be different than what you go by, much as me, Abigail to Abby, or maybe your name is Thomas, but you prefer to go by Tom. So by signing it, you're telling the person, what they can call you. And then we also recommend considering adding your gender pronoun to your email. This is useful if you maybe don't have an English name or an English sounding name. Many Americans may not have ever seen your name before, so they may not be aware if your name is typically a female name or a male name. So adding your pronoun could help save some embarrassment in the future and just make it easier for everyone to know what you prefer to go by. And then the fourth tip is to avoid all capitalization, so avoid all caps. So this is when all of your letters are capitalized, much like in number 4, all caps. In English, this typically means that you are shouting or angry. So you shouldn't ever use this, especially in emails, unless you actually are shouting and angry. But I would guess if you're writing a business email, you're not shouting and you're not angry. So you don't want to use all capitalization because that's what Americans will assume you're doing when you use all caps. And then you want to make sure to focus on your subject line when you write an email. So you want to write short, strong subject lines. This is the first text that your reader sees of your email. So what you write in your subject line determines if and how quickly your email gets read. So you want to make sure to summarize the content of the email and also include any action that you want the reader to take, but make sure to keep it short so that it doesn't, overflow too far. So an example of a good subject line would be a reminder, sales report due tomorrow. So, you've told them exactly why you're writing and what they need to watch out for tomorrow and when their sales report is due. And then before you send your email, you want to make sure to edit for typos. So these are typographical errors or mistakes you made in the typing process. So just go through and read your message again before you send it to make sure everything looks good and there aren't any typos. We recommend reading your message out loud. By reading your message out loud, you're able to check for awkward phrasing that doesn't say exactly what you wanted to say. And it'll also help you look out for those tricky English words that sound the same but have different spellings and meanings. So your email software probably includes software such as spell check or Grammarly that will highlight, areas of your email that don't look right, but they might miss some of those words that are spelled correctly but actually have a different meaning than what you meant to say. So we're actually going to talk about those in the next slide. Those are called homophones. So those are English words that are pronounced the same but have different meanings and usually different spellings. So we're going to highlight a few of those. We're going to do a fun little quiz to see some common homophones that you may encounter as you're writing a business email. So let's start with two homophones that might come up. So the first one will be do and do. So think about this, what you're going to say if you were going to use these. So for example, you might say, I'll do it. When is it due? So the first one, I'll do it, is that first option is an action. So, and then when is it due is a deadline. So you'll want to make sure that you use the correct one and you don't flip them around, because those will have a different meaning. The next homophones we want you to consider are there, and there. So these are 3, which makes it even trickier. But you can figure it out if you read carefully. So there is they are. The other there is a possessive pronoun of they, and there is a place that you are not. So an example of a sentence using all of these would be they're taking their chairs over there. So they are taking the chairs that they own over to a different place. So it could be pretty tricky if you're not using the correct one. Third one would be no and no. So the first one is to have knowledge, and then no is the opposite of yes. So a sentence you might use as, I'll ask my boss, but I know he's going to say no. I know he's not going to say yes. He's going to deny my request. And then we have for and for. So the first for is a preposition indicating a purpose, and then the other for is a number. So these are easy to mix up, but you might use both of them in a sentence. We have a cake for Lisa's birthday. The party is at 4. So first one is the preposition, what the cake is for, and then the second one is the time of the party. And so don't mix up those because people might get confused. And then our 5th one is to, and to. Again, sadly, there are 3 words that all sound the same and have a different meaning. English is pretty tricky. A sentence you might use all of these is 2 people are going to the conference. Are you going to? So there are 2, a number, 2 people going to a conference. And then they're asking, are you also going? So are you going to? And this is easy to mix up. I know even English speakers use these incorrectly a lot of the time. So if you read carefully, hopefully you can catch some of those mistakes. And then we have right and right. So a sentence with these words might be, Heather is right. We should write our own newsletter. So, Heather is correct. We should write our own newsletter instead of, taking it from someone else. And then hour and hour. So hour is a period of time that is 60 minutes. Hour is the possessive pronoun of we. So maybe you'll say to someone, we have an hour at the conference for our presentation. So we have 60 minutes to give the presentation that we put together. And the last homophone that we'll talk about today is week and week. So our sales pitch is weak. Let's improve it before next week. So our sales pitch isn't very good. It lacks strength. We have 7 days to make it better. So if you interchange those 2 words, it could be confusing to others. So just try to read through your emails before you send them. All right, and then we can move on. We talked about emails, we talked about the phone. So now we can talk about water cooler conversations. So we can talk about socializing with your coworker. So this is a big important aspect of your program. You're going to want to be able to socialize with your coworkers and kind of form relationships with them. So what is a water cooler conversation? This is just kind of a fun way to talk about casual discussions between coworkers and non-coworkers about non-work related topics. So it's just, essentially it's water cooler gossip, water cooler chats. It references a time when employees would take breaks and gather around the water cooler in the break room to talk. So these days, water cooler conversations references any in-office socialization or maybe in-office gossip. So they don't always necessarily take place at a water cooler anymore. They do take place anywhere. Maybe it's just even in chat, on Slack or in email. But essentially any conversation between coworkers that happens about non-work related topics. And what do some of these conversations look like? They are all about small talk. Americans do love small talk. So small talk is, polite, unimportant conversation in a social setting. So essentially it's anything, to fill an awkward silence, essentially in the US. We don't really like awkward silences in this country. So a lot of people will chat with a stranger kind of about non-important things while they're doing things like while you're waiting for an elevator or waiting for the bus, or maybe you have small talk with casual acquaintances or coworkers who you don't know very well. So those are, important conversations that you'll probably, well, not important conversations, but conversations that you will certainly have in the office. So it's not uncommon for coworkers to say hello to each other in the morning, even if you don't know each other very well. It is considered polite, to say good morning back to someone if they say good morning to you. They might even ask, how are you? And then they might just keep walking. In the US, how are you doesn't always need a response. Someone uses it often as a greeting, as a way of saying hello, instead of, as an actual question that they're expecting an in-depth answer to. So if someone says, oh, good morning, how are you? You can usually just say, oh, I'm good, thanks, how are you? And then you keep walking. They don't usually want a full explanation of how you dropped your lunch on the subway floor on the way to work. Again, this will depend on the person and the relationship you have with them, but generally it's just used as a greeting. So some small topics include, sports. So maybe you'll want to talk about a sports game that you saw the night before, or someone really likes baseball. Maybe you'll talk to them about the baseball team that they like. You could also talk about weekend or vacation plans. So, asking someone, how was your weekend? What did you do? And kind of talking about that and what you did as well. You can maybe talk about popular television shows, that everyone is watching. You can talk about food, where, asking someone where their favorite lunch spot is or what they had for lunch. And then the universal one that everyone always talks about is the weather. It's really hard not to comment on the weather every day. So you can expect to maybe talk about how much it's raining or how cold it is already, even though it's only September. So those are all good conversations to consider for small talk. So, we want to know a little bit about what your favorite small talk topic is. So feel free to type in the chat some things that you generally like to talk about. For example, my go-to small talk is I often talk about someone's weekend, or, I like to talk about my cat a lot. So that's another good small talk conversation to consider is someone's pets or your own pet. Those are all good options. We'll also be pausing now for questions. So while you think of some small talk topics that you use, think of some questions you might have as well, and please type them into the chat, and we'll pause to answer some of those. Tamin, do you have a small talk topic that you use a lot?
I tend to use my small talk about sports, so the local baseball team in New York, the local basketball team in New York, and I totally agree with your idea about weather. On a daily basis, I'll make small talk about the weather.
Yeah, that one's pretty easy.
I'm seeing a few people in the chat box are writing similar things about weather, about their pets. Clothing has come up twice here as something that they will make small talk about. Also the last meal they had. So I guess that's a really good, like you said, favorite lunch spot, recommendations for restaurants. And also I like places that someone has traveled, or the person wrote places that they've traveled, is a good idea for a small talk.
Oh, those are all great.
And interspersed, we do have a couple of questions about the presentation as well. Looks like there's two I see so far that have come in. So the first goes back to when you were talking about phone etiquette. Someone wrote in, what do they do if they just simply can't understand someone on the phone?
Yeah, it can be really hard if you don't understand someone on the phone. A lot of times, sometimes it's a connection issue. So you could try a few times, just telling them you're having a hard time understanding them, just being honest and saying, I think we have a bad connection, or I'm having a hard time understanding you. Could you please repeat what you said? Typically, people will understand that and they will try to say what they asked in a different way, or maybe they will, speak slower. If it really is truly a bad connection, you could even ask them to call back or tell them that you'll call them back, because sometimes you just need to try again. So I think just being honest with the person and telling them you don't understand them, and asking what you can do to help make sure you understand each other.
That makes a lot of sense. And the other question is going back to, you talked about the many different acronyms that are used in business lingo, sorry. So how can someone know which acronyms their host will use in advance of their internship?
Yeah, so acronyms are hard. CC and BCC are ones that are used often for almost everyone, because everyone uses email these days. But it can be a bit difficult to know what your host employer will use. But I think you can do a little bit of research before you come to the US or before you start any internship. You'll want to do some research on your industry to kind of see what some common acronyms are, and what they would use in an accounting firm, for example. What are some general acronyms used throughout the accounting world? Or maybe you're in accounting, and I'm sure they have their own specific acronyms just for accounting that only accountants would know, but that they would maybe use across multiple companies, because it's a pretty well-known acronym in the field. So just doing some research beforehand would be helpful for sure.
Great, thank you. Those are all the questions that we have so far.
Awesome. Then we can move on to the last part of the presentation, which is about idioms. So we do have a video that I'm going to let introduce this next part about idioms.
You ever hear people say, it's raining cats and dogs out here? Everybody knows that it ain't raining cats and dogs, it's raining rain. It's an idiom, a figure of speech. But what would happen if idioms were real?
Okay, so that comedian talks about it's raining cats and dogs. So that is a common idiom that is used in English. So we'll start by defining exactly what idiom is. So it's a phrase or group of words with a figurative meaning that is typically understood culturally. So it's raining cats and dogs, as he said in the video. That doesn't actually mean that there are cats and dogs raining from the sky. That would be very sad if they all fell to the ground. So that's not actually happening. It just means it's raining heavily. So it's just a way of saying something different than what you're saying, essentially. Idioms can be confusing, I know, especially for non-native speakers, because the individual words together don't always make sense. So if you heard it's raining cats and dogs, you might be really confused because there's not cats and dogs coming down from the sky. But if you didn't know it's raining very heavily, then you wouldn't know what someone was trying to say. So, unfortunately, the best way to learn idioms is just by using them frequently and trying to, become familiar with them and to kind of memorize them. So that's why we're kind of presenting a few to you today, so that you become familiar with some idioms. There are quite a number of idioms used in the business world in English. So familiarizing yourself with some of those can kind of help increase your understanding when you come to the US to do an internship. So we do have another video just to give you an example of what it would look like if it was actually raining cats and dogs. So let's see what that would look like. I don't think we got the full audio there, but he was basically saying, oh, look, it's raining cats and dogs. And you could see out the window all the cats and dogs raining from the sky. So thankfully that doesn't actually happen. I guess if all the cats and dogs were okay, that would be pretty fun. But that would be kind of silly if that was meant literally. So now we're going to do kind of a fun quiz to kind of test how much you might already know about idioms. So the first quiz question that we have is which of these idioms, so there's 3 in the yellow circles, which of these means to hesitate or talk about trivial things in order to avoid talking about what is really important? So I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds to kind of look at those and choose which one you think would be the best option, which one is correct. And then we will move on to look. I hope you have your thought in your head. So which one is that? Let's see, Taman. It's beat around the bush. So that means what? To hesitate or talk about trivial things. So if we go to the next video, we will see what that would look like if it was meant literally. So this is the...
Really? You know what I'm talking about? It's kind of... Yo, quit beating around the bush! No!
Okay, so that was the comedian from the first slide. I forgot to mention that you'd be seeing him again. So if you saw his friend said, quit beating around the bush, because he was just chattering on about things that were important. So he was figuratively beating around the bush, but then he went and he actually beat the bush, which was, I thought, quite amusing. So thankfully, that doesn't actually mean what it sounds like it means. It means to hesitate or talk about trivial things. So you're not actually beating a bush. The other 2 options, lose your train of thought. That means forgetting what you're going to say. So, you lose your thought, you forget. That one makes a little bit more sense. Get off track. That means to discuss something not related to the goal or the purpose of the conversation. So someone might say, while I enjoy hearing about Jerry's cat, while I enjoy talking about Jerry's cat, we seem to have gotten off track. We're not talking about the purpose of this meeting that we're having. So that would be get off track. And it's a bit different than beating around the bush, which is when you're trying to avoid purposefully talking about something important. All right, the next quiz question. Which of these idioms means to have the latest information on a topic? Is it to get the ball rolling, give the green light, or to be up to speed? Okay, I hope you have an idea in mind. Great, to be up to speed. So that is the what it means to have the latest information on a topic. So we have defined that kind of in the next slide. So you have the most information you need to do a project. You're up to speed on that project. It is different than to get the ball rolling. That means to begin a project. So maybe you're pushing, and I always imagine pushing something down a hill. That's kind of starting, it's rolling, you're starting a project. And then give the green light is to grant permission or move forward with something. So, kind of if you think about driving a car, if you have a green light, you can go, giving someone the green light gives them permission to go, to move forward. Our next quiz question is, which of these idioms means to waste one's efforts by pursuing the wrong thing or path? Is it miss the mark, bark up the wrong tree, or red tape? And we will see that it is bark up the wrong tree. So that means to waste one's efforts by pursuing the wrong thing or path. So I do have another video where we can see what it looks like to bark up the wrong tree. Oop, looks like we missed the audio on that one. But you could see the character was barking up a tree. So here we go. There we go. Sorry, we have a few technical difficulties. But the the comedian was barking up a tree. Thankfully, that doesn't happen all the time. You know, that's not what's actually happening, because that would be quite weird. That usually just means that, you know, you're pursuing the wrong path, you're wasting your efforts because something is not going to happen. You know, the sentence underneath I have here, you know, the company won't partner with us, you're barking up the wrong tree. You know, it's not going to work. It is a little different than miss the mark. That means to fail to achieve the desired outcome. And then red tape means official rules and processes that seem unnecessary or excessive and delay results. So this is typically, you know, government paperwork a lot of times called red tape because you have to do a lot of paperwork and go through committees or, you know, get things approved. So it does slow down things a little bit. So when people say red tape, they talk about those sorts of things that maybe seem to slow things down, delay moving forward, because of all of these, you know, paperwork that you have to do. Next quiz question we have is, which of these idioms means to bring someone back to reality, especially if they're fantasizing about something unrealistic? So is it put on the back burner, cut corners, or burst someone's bubble? So it is burst someone's bubble. So in the next video, we will see what that would look like if it was meant literally.
Why are you always bursting my bubbles, Dad?
So if you saw in the video, you know, that was someone's who was popping all of that person's bubbles. You know, if I was outside and someone was popping all of my bubbles, I would certainly get upset. So bursting someone's bubble is kind of, you know, it's not always a positive thing. Sometimes it's negative. You know, someone believes something in their head, they've created this idea that they're fantasizing about, that they want, you know, they're excited about something, and they might be sad or upset if you tell them that that's not possible or it's not going to happen. You know, you're bursting their bubble. That would be upsetting in the same way if someone popped all your bubbles would be upsetting. So, you know, in the business world, it might be necessary to pop someone's bubbles. You know, you might upset her, but she needs to know her proposal isn't going to be approved, for example. But, you know, it is typically have a little bit of a negative connotation, even if it's sometimes necessary. So if you looked at the other ones, you know, on the back burner is typically when something you want to keep it low priority and you want to put it on hold. So you would put it on the back burner. This is often, you know, something you would think about with cooking, for example. If you're cooking pasta and you just want to boil some water for your pasta, but then you put the water on and you don't have to think about it as much, you would probably put it on the back burner. That's the same way with projects. If you don't want to focus as much on a project right now, you'll say, let's put it on the back burner. And then to cut corners is to do something in the easiest, cheapest, and quickest way possible. Again, this is typically a bad thing, so you often are neglecting something important. So it does kind of have more of a negative connotation as well. The next quiz question we have, which of these idioms means to provide skill or offer a contribution to the group effort? So is that brainstorm, bring to the table, or look at the big picture? And it looks like it's going to be bring to the table. So we don't sadly have a video for this one, but bring to the table, again, means to provide skill or offer contribution. So, you know, if someone's just hired, maybe your supervisor will say, please welcome our new hire, Amanda. She has a lot of experience to bring to the table. So she's got a lot of skill and she's going to contribute a lot. Brainstorm, on the other hand, means to, you know, produce an idea or problem solve through group discussion. So maybe you're in a meeting and you all want to, you know, improve on next year's sales goals. Your supervisor might say, let's brainstorm. Let's kind of try to come up with a lot of ideas together quickly to kind of come up with a good one. And look at the big picture as to focus on the most important aspects of something and its long-term effects rather than the small details. So you want to look at, you know, the full picture of something rather than, you know, something really small that maybe isn't important right now. Okay, let's move on to the next quiz question. So which of these idioms means to risk all one has on the success or failure of one thing? Is it a long shot, think outside the box, or put all one's eggs in one basket? And it is put all one's eggs in one basket. So we do have a video for this to see what it would look like if this was real.
All my money in stock. I would have put all my eggs in one basket.
So if you saw, he was had a bunch of baskets with eggs. He was putting all his eggs into different baskets and not one basket. So putting all one's eggs in one basket is generally considered a bad thing. It means to risk everything on one thing. So typically you don't want to do that. Typically you want to diversify or put your you know, your eggs in different baskets to give you more of a chance of being successful. A long shot is something that is unlikely to happen but worth trying for. So you might say it's a long shot but I can ask my contact at the record label if he will give me the phone number for Beyonce's agent. So most likely Beyonce isn't going to help you, but you know, you could always try, right? So it's worth trying, but probably isn't going to happen. And then think outside the box is to think creatively about new ideas rather than using traditional or expected ideas. So you want to try to think of something new, something entirely different. That would be thinking outside the box. Our next quiz question is, which of these idioms means to follow the rules and regulations exactly? So is it on the same page, keep in the loop, or play by the book? So it's going to be play by the book. So we don't have a video for this one, but that means to follow the rules and regulations exactly. So, you know, someone might say Thomas isn't going to approve that exception. He plays by the book. So, you know, he's not going to bend the rules. He's not going to approve anything differently. He's going to play it exactly by the book. So he's going to follow all the rules perfectly. On the same page is to have the same understanding as someone else, to agree. So you want to make sure you're on the same page before you begin a project, for example. You want to make sure everyone has the same understanding of what you're going to be doing. Keep in the loop is to make sure someone has the latest information and is involved. So, you know, your supervisor might say, you take the lead on this, but keep me in the loop. So make sure to give me all of the information so I know what's going on. All right, we have two more quiz questions, so we're almost finished. Which of these idioms means to amaze or impress someone? Is it knock someone's socks off, learn the ropes, or wrap up? So it's knock someone's socks off. So if we go to the next video, we have a video of what this would look like.
You got a tidy. Still knock your socks off.
So if we saw he was eating a cookie and then his socks flew off. So knock someone's socks off means to amaze or impress someone. Thankfully, your socks don't fly off whenever this happens, but it is another way of saying, you're very impressed. Learn the ropes is to learn how a job is done. So this, probably goes back to sailing when sailors used to have to learn how to tie ropes on a sailboat. They would learn the ropes, learn how their job is done. So it's the same now, you're just not learning about ropes usually. And then wrap up means to bring to a close. So, to almost finish something, to wrap it up means you're done. Let's stop doing what we're doing. All right, our last quiz question. Which of these idioms means to do something that makes it impossible to return to an earlier state or relationship? Is it back to square one, burns one bridges, or start from scratch? And it is burn one's bridges. So we do have one last video to show you about what this would look like if it were real.
Always burning bridges.
Great. So he had some bridges that he was burning. So if you burn a bridge, you can't cross it again. So it is impossible to go back to the way things were. This usually is meant in terms of a relationship with someone. So, if you do something poorly, you maybe burn a bridge. So that person isn't going to forgive you. That person isn't going to work with you again. So it is a bad thing. You don't want to burn a bridge. You usually want to be able to return to a relationship if you need to in terms of business. Start from scratch means to start at the very beginning where nothing has been done. So this is often used in cooking. So if you make something from scratch, for example, it means you start with all of the separate ingredients and you put them together all on your own, and you didn't buy anything pre-made. So that means to start at the very beginning. And then back to square one has a similar idea, but it's a little bit different. It means to start over, usually after one attempt has failed. So if you did something, it didn't work out, you have to go back to square one. So you have to try again from the very beginning. Awesome. So those were all of the idioms that we wanted to present to you today. There are so many more, but you can definitely do some research and look for some other ones you might expect to find in the US. They can make it difficult to understand English sometimes, but the main thing to remember is that don't be afraid to ask for clarification. If you don't understand something, just ask. Your coworkers will be more than happy to clarify for you, I'm sure. And asking if you don't understand can lead to less misunderstanding in the future or maybe on your next project. So just feel free to be open and ask when you need some help. So if you do have any final questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. We are finalizing, wrapping up this presentation. I did want to stop and mention the last webinar in this series that we have coming up next week. It will be a participant panel with past participants and present participants kind of giving you some advice on what they recommend you do to have a successful internship. So that will be a fun one. Try not to miss that. If you can also find all of our past webinars on our YouTube as well. With that, I will take any final questions. Are there any that came in, Timon?
We have two quick questions. One came in before you maybe perhaps answer this one, but I think it's still worth repeating. What should I do if I can't understand a fellow colleague or my supervisor during my internship?
Yeah, so that does relate kind of to the last kind of slide, is that just ask them for clarification. They do want to help you, and they want you to get better at English and to have a good experience. So please feel free to tell them, I've never heard that term, I don't know what that means. Could you please help explain it to me? Or just asking them to repeat themselves sometimes will be helpful as well. So don't be afraid to ask.
And the other question we have is sort of along the same lines, perhaps the inverse. What if I can't find the right business terminology to explain myself during my internship?
Yeah, so this is it, usually it is kind of the inverse, isn't it? So if you don't know, again, your coworkers they want to help you. So even just trying to explain as much as you can or explain around it, generally they'll probably try to help you brainstorm to come up with the right word that you're looking for, or to kind of try to understand you as well. So it is all about communication and being open with your communication with your coworkers, and just trying the best you can, and they'll most likely give you, a little bit of grace and help you if you don't understand something or you can't explain yourself well.
Excellent. Thank you, Abby. Those were the only two questions we have. This was a lot of fun. It's nice to go through all the idioms and see how they would actually be if they were in real life. Thank you for going through what's a very broad topic.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm glad everyone could join. It was fun to do. And if you have questions, please reach out to us.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.